Have you ever spent hours tweaking the tiniest details on a project you're working on, and then you think you're done, but then you look at it and you find some other sort of thing that you need to fix on it? So you go and fix that thing, you take the step back again, and oh wait, no, there's something else that needs to be fixed. So you fix that thing and you find something else that's also a mistake and has to be fixed. And before you know it, you are hours or days into this project and you feel nowhere close to it being done. You've got your boss constantly questioning, when is this going to be done? This was supposed to be done 2 days ago. Or you have your partner or spouse nagging you about, this was supposed to be done forever ago. Like, what are you doing? Why aren't you doing this? But you are doing the thing. You've spent so much time doing the thing, but you just can't get it done. That is the trap of perfectionism, and it might be holding you back way more than you realize. I personally struggle with perfectionism so hard, and I have since I was a kid. I remember in middle school, I really wanted to join the dance team, but I had never taken dance lessons before. I felt like I wasn't a good dancer at all, like I had no rhythm. And as much as I wanted to be a part of that team, I sort of talked myself out of it because I was like, I am not good enough. I don't know the things. I'm not perfect. I'm not as good as these other girls. So why should I try out for it? I started creating content about 3.5 years ago now. I started out on Twitch primarily streaming, and then I started branching out into making TikTok stuff until eventually landing on YouTube. But anyway, I remember when I first started out, I watched a ton of TikTok tutorials about tips for growing your platforms, and it was always quality versus quantity. It's got to be good quality. It has to be so good, or you're not going to draw an audience in. So in my mind, I interpreted that as, if my stuff is not, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen sort of quality, it wasn't worth doing. So I remember just stressing out over like 30-second TikToks about like the perfect transitions, or is this the perfect song to use? And honestly, I talked myself out of uploading so many videos because I just didn't think they were good enough. And like it got to the point where I hadn't uploaded anything in probably 3 weeks because I tried every single day, but for some reason I found something wrong with it and I just never uploaded it. When in reality, the quality was probably just fine. Like, we're talking about TikTok. Like, you don't have to have the absolute best quality to grow on TikTok, let's be honest. So I probably lost out on a lot of good opportunity, or just, getting in the habit of making content at all. Like, I just lost out on so much of that because of the overthinking. And I remember talking to someone about how I felt like I really wasn't growing my platforms, and they were like, well, you haven't uploaded anything in 3 weeks, like you need to stop being lazy. And here I am like, no, like I've worked on something every single day for the past 3 weeks, and here's why it just never got uploaded. So it looks like I was being lazy or inconsistent to other people, but in reality, I wasn't. I just was too anxious, essentially, to upload the stuff that I had. And that is the double-edged sword of perfectionism. You want to do your best, but you find yourself unable to start, or even you start but you don't finish because your goal feels so overwhelming, or it's just never good enough. So there's 2 sort of categories to perfectionism. One of those is called personal standard perfectionism, and that is where the perfectionism is really internalized. It's where you sort of have this standard for yourself and you always want to meet that standard or go above and beyond that standard. And then the other category is external concern perfectionism. So that is where the perfectionism comes from the expectations of others. So basically, everyone around you expects you to be perfect, or you expect yourself to be perfect for them to meet their standards. I think the external concern perfectionism is the one that really trips people up. So where does that come from? Usually it comes from growing up in a family or a household where everyone expected you to be absolutely perfect. So usually that means straight A's, being the best on whatever sports team, never getting in trouble, like really being that class pet sort of golden boy, golden girl sort of thing. Or maybe you had a sibling or a friend that was considered the golden child, and everyone expected you to live up to their standard and what they were doing and do everything right like they do. So what inevitably happens is you are sort of doomed to fail, right? It's either you do just as good as they do, or you don't, you lose. And it feels like a very lose-lose situation, and usually it is. You're usually not better than the other person. You're just as good, which is good, but it's not better, if that makes sense. So your mindset becomes anything less than perfect is failure, and the fear of not being good enough keeps us from doing anything because we already have it set up in our minds like no matter what we do, it's just never going to be good enough. So why should I even start this project? Why should I even try this thing? Because it doesn't matter, because it's never going to be good enough. So there's actually research and science that backs this up. What researchers have found is that the people that have that high external concern perfectionism, what happens when an event happens, let's say that you try out for the basketball team and you don't make the team, that's considered a failure, quote unquote. What happens with people with that external concern perfectionism, the part of the brain that sort of processes that, it basically shuts down and it tries to drive your attention away from that thing. So you just try to avoid the situation entirely. You don't tell your parents that you didn't make the team, or you try to avoid that conversation for as long as possible. If you get a bad grade on a test, you rip up the test and you don't show your parents because you know it's not perfect and you're going to get in trouble for that. Over time, we just don't put ourselves into any sort of situation that could be less than perfect. So we end up not doing anything. And when we compare this to the people that have personal standard perfectionism, so a different part of their brain processes the event or the mistake, okay? And what happens in their brain is they actually slow down and think about what happened, think about the mistake, quote unquote, and then they actually learn from that and don't make that mistake again or improve over time. And it's not so detrimental. It doesn't make them feel like they are a failure overall. They see mistakes as a learning opportunity and it's not chaos, and they're okay. They are more resilient. And then here's what sucks even more about perfectionism. So let's say that you're aware of your perfectionism. A lot of people are very acutely aware that they have this perfectionistic anxiety, and they talked about it to friends, or I've even heard other therapists, they give this sort of advice. But usually the advice is, well, just don't care about what people think so much. Just learn to roll with it and just don't let anyone's opinions bother you. How many of y'all have heard that when you've talked about this to someone else before, right? Like, oh, just they don't matter. Other people's opinions don't matter. That's like the shittiest advice ever, right? And it is not helpful at all, because when you have that external concern perfectionism, your brain is literally wired. It is structured to care what other people think. Like biologically, that is your nature when you have this sort of perfectionism. So you cannot just not care anymore because your brain is not wired to do that. So now you might be thinking like, well, if my brain is wired to do this, if it's literally biologically set up to do this, like what the fuck am I supposed to do about that? I can't change like my genetic makeup. This is the really cool part of our brain. Our brain has what's called plasticity, which means that it can be molded and shaped to other things over time and with effort. So yes, you can learn to care less about what other people think over time. But how do we do that? Because you can say it, right? But how do you actually change your brain to feel that way? We have to learn to embrace imperfections and mistakes and not let that dictate how we see ourselves and our value. So a really great goal to work towards in this is to kind of get away from that external concern perfectionism and move more towards the personal standard perfectionism. Because remember, that category of perfectionism, that is all internalized in you. So you want to do the best you can or better than what you did last time, right? It's your own internal standard that you're working towards. So if you feel like you did a good job, you feel like you put all the effort you could into this, and this is the very best you can do in the personal standard perfectionism, that satisfies you. That feels good. That feels okay. So something you can start doing if you do struggle a lot with the external concern perfectionism, I definitely do, so I try to do these things, is when you are kind of facing the moment where you feel like you haven't done good enough or something feels really overwhelming, you're just not going to do it. You recognize those thoughts. You have those split-second thoughts, but then you probably start thinking about, oh, like it's just not going to be good enough. I'm not going to do it. It's not up to my boyfriend's standards, so just not going to try. So if you find yourself having whatever, like you need to do the thing, but then you find yourself instantly thinking about something else, that's where you need to stop and write down those sort of instant thoughts or whatever you're having in that moment that distracts you from the task you're trying to do. Remember, we want to slow down like the personal standard perfectionistic person does. Slow down and think about what's going on and challenge those distracting thoughts, the thoughts that your brain is having to get away from the hard task, think about those, sit with those. And here is the really cool thing. When we recognize those thoughts, you don't have to fix it or think, how do I not have these thoughts again? That's not the goal. The goal is that you just slow down. By slowing down, you're activating a different part of your brain that allows you to process the things and think more realistically. The other key to this is setting standards for yourself. So when you have a task, you are probably thinking about other people's expectations of that, right? Like, what do they expect from you? What do they want? What would make them happy? You probably don't think about you in those situations. You probably don't think about what would make you happy. What is your level that you want to hit? What is a good quality for you? I have self-sabotaged so much around like losing weight and being healthy. I often kind of do all or nothing thinking, which is also tied to perfectionism. And I can do a whole other video on all or nothing thinking if you'd like. Let me know in the comments. But anyway, so I will often think like I have to work out 5-7 days a week, and I can't just walk on my treadmill for 5 or 10 minutes because that's more exercise than I'm getting now. I have to do an hour full sweat fest. I have to be totally soaked in sweat and just exhausted afterwards because that's what society wants. That's what these hot models do. So I need to do that too. And then I know I can't do that. I hate working out. I am out of shape. Honestly, I need to lose some weight. So I know that's hard for me to do, but I know that's what society has taught me to do. That's what society wants. But I know that I can't keep up to that standard right now. So I just never start. I know that I can't work out 7 days a week. So I just don't do it. But if I change my thought process to thinking about what would be good for me, I know that even if I just walked on my walking treadmill with my standing desk for 20 minutes a day, that is way more exercise than what I have gotten in months. And that would be a good step for me. That would meet my personal standard. So if I start with that and take that sort of baby step, that is a good quality standard for me, as I continue to do that, then I can raise that standard a little bit more. Okay, I've been doing this for 20 minutes, 3 days a week. Let's try 30 minutes for 3 days a week. And we can continue to increase our level of quality and what we want, and kind of ignore what society thinks that we should do or what someone else thinks that I should do. So recognize you have those thoughts when you're faced with something. When you start thinking, how do I make that person happy? What would make them really happy? What would make it quality for them? How do I be perfect for them? Again, slow down, stop that thought process and change it and shift it to what would make me happy? What would be a good quality for me? Perfectionism thrives on the fear of failure. But the truth is, learning to let go and grieve that perfect image of ourselves and setting our own personal standard that's not perfect, but is acceptable, would make us happy. That is where the good shift from that external concern perfectionism to our personal standard perfectionism happens. This is what makes us happier over time. It lets us make progress on the goals that we have because we're not hung up on it being perfect. We have a lower quality standard for ourselves than the perfect, and that feels more achievable to us, and we can make action towards that. Have you struggled with perfectionism before? And if so, what have you done about it? If you're comfortable sharing, I would love for you to put it in the comments. I think it's really nice to know that there's other people that also struggle with some of these things and that you can do something about it. And if there's any other sort of mental wellness topics you'd like me to cover, please feel free to comment those as well. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.